I have so many things I want to talk about with this movie, but I'd love to talk about the fact that it originated from a book by Percival Everett called Erasure.
Yes.
And I'm so curious to just hear about, for you as someone that we know as a writer, what was the process of coming to the book, choosing the book, adapting the book, and making that transition to film?
Yeah, I found the novel in December of 2020. I was reading a review for a different book called Interior Chinatown, and in that review it said that Interior Chinatown had a satire reminiscent of Percival Everett's Erasure. I'd never read Erasure, so went out and bought it, and kind of immediately felt like it had, have you ever read a book that felt like it was written specifically for you? Mm-hmm. That's how it felt when I was reading this novel. It was not just the kind of, you guys have seen the movie so I can't spoil it, not just like the satirical themes about what it means to be a creative of color and the expectations that people put on you because of that, but also, I have two older siblings. We have a weird sort of like sibling trio dynamic sometimes, where we're closer at some points and we're more distant at other points. We all have a very sort of overbearing father figure in our lives who looms pretty large, and I'm sure he will when he's gone. My mother didn't die of Alzheimer's, but my mother died of cancer 8 years ago, and so there was a period of time when, like Lisa, my oldest brother, was living in our hometown and taking care of her, and then toward the end of her life, I came home and sort of took care of her for sort of like the last days of her life. So there was all these just strange overlaps in the novel it started to feel eerie. And so I just felt like, oh, I know this. I really know this story in my bones. And so about 50 pages in, I knew that I wanted to adapt it. About 100 pages in, I started reading the novel in Jeffrey Wright's voice. That's how early I started thinking of Jeffrey, as sort of like I started envisioning him in the scenes. And so as soon as I was done with it, I reached out to my manager and asked if we could get in contact with Percival. And Percival asked to speak to me on the phone, and when we talked for about a half an hour, he asked me why I was interested. I told him why I was passionate about it, and then he gave me the rights for free for 6 months. He said go off and go write a script, and if anything comes of it, then you can pay me then. And so I'm forever grateful to him for that, because rights discussions can get tied up in legal stuff for months, if not years. So he just said go ahead and feel free, and I was I'll be forever indebted to him for that.
I'd love to ask you, something that I loved about the movie was its examination of our cultural resistance to complexity, combined with the film's actually very complex relationship to the novel My Pathology, and then retitled Fuck. Because I get the sense that you, as the filmmaker, were not willing to completely write it off, and in fact found some room to embrace something of it, in that it exists.
Yeah.
And so I'd be curious to know how you tonally approached that in making the film and working with Jeffrey, in terms of finding mercy for the character.
Oh, yeah.
And also a sense of letting go of shame.
Yeah, so mercy for the character of Monk, you're saying? Yeah.
That he finds for himself.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that Jeffrey does beautifully in the film is that it's hard to play a lovable grump, right? Like sort of if you err too far on the side of grump, then you sort of lose everybody and nobody's rooting for you anymore. And so one of the things that Jeffrey does, and just came into the part playing naturally, I'm going to talk to you guys about my therapist. I'm sorry. This is going to be a very LA Q&A. But I had a therapist once who told me this really great thing that I think of a lot, which is she said that, because I used to have anger issues, and she said, I still have anger issues, but I've learned to channel that anger in a much healthier way. But she said, anger is not a real emotion. She just said anger is a secondary emotion, and underneath anger, especially for men, is either pain or fear. And that sort of, we have been socialized in a society that sort of like doesn't really take kindly to men saying like, I feel afraid, or you hurt my feelings. And those kinds of things used to be very hard for me to say. And so instead, I would get mad because that was sort of like the way that men dealt with things. And I think that the thing that Jeffrey does really well in the character here, and why you root for him, despite the fact that he's so pugnacious, like he's fighting from the start of the movie, he's fighting with his students and his colleagues and his family and his girlfriend, like he's just fighting with everybody. But I think that sort of like what wins you over is that he plays it in such a way that despite the fact that you could see him fighting all the time, you can see that he's in a lot of pain. You sort of like see that he's hurting. That's sort of like, this isn't a guy who's just rude to be rude. He's sort of just so frustrated, and he's hurt that his father killed himself. He's hurt that he's losing his mother. He's hurt that his sister's died. He's hurt that he's alienated from his brother. He's hurt that his work isn't as popular as he thinks it should be. Like, there's all these things that he's frustrated and hurt by, and you can really see that in just the character that he, in the way that he sort of decided to play the character at the outset. And so I think that, finding mercy for that character was something that we, Jeffrey and I always were in lockstep at the beginning, that we wanted it to be, we wanted it to feel, how am I going to put this? Jeffrey and I always wanted to make a movie that we were making a movie that I think allowed the characters to be messy, because I think that that's something that black actors don't often get to play, is messy characters. It's either sort of, one or the other. It's either sort of like a crackhead or the president of the United States. It's sort of like, it is like that is frequently like the two poles that black actors are allowed to play. And so we wanted to play somebody that just felt real in this way, and that felt messy, but was complex and nuanced, and we wanted that for all the characters, really. We wanted that for Sterling, we wanted that for Coraline, for Agnes, like for everybody in the film. We wanted them to have that grace and mercy, I guess you could call it. We sort of wanted to make it feel like real people, and real people are deeply flawed, but most of them, are trying their best at the end of the day.
Yes, and the pleasure of the movie is, for me anyway, is in seeing a sense of unfinished selves. That every character is to some degree wrestling with new things and changing and evolving and rejecting and embracing things, but that there's this larger cultural imperative to be one thing, to say one thing, and of course that's not really what art or culture is. And so I was really moved by the depiction of so many different kinds of struggles with that sort of limiting essentialism.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that something that I never wanted the movie to suggest was that we, black art needs to be cheery and it all needs to be comedies, and why are we talking about why are we so depressing all the time? And it's like, look, I'm not saying that we should do that. I'm saying that, like, sometimes your father's not a deadbeat dad. He's just he's emotionally unavailable. Like that is something that black people deal with as well. It's not just like your dad's in jail or he's been killed or he's run off or something else. It's like sometimes he's there and present and like successful, and he's a doctor and he's smart, but he's also just deeply emotionally unavailable. And so that kind of like screws with your relationship with him. There's a whole look. Yes, the black experience includes slavery. It absolutely does. But it also, as I said, includes the President of the United States. And there's a sort of like whole world of stories in between those two poles that we very rarely get to see. It is strange to me that sort of despite that variety of life, we really only get the same 5 or 6 rehashed stories about the black experience over and over and over. And so it was important to me to depict that sort of like, it was important to me to pick that variety, even within the same family, right? Like even within the same family, people who are raised under the same roof are vastly different, and sort of, and I wanted to express that and show the sort of, I think that blackness is, and this isn't something that just is about, yes, this is about a black man and his family, but I have Mexican friends who say, why does every movie or TV show shot in Mexico have to be about drug cartels? Or somebody escaping their miserable small village for sort of like the promised land that is the United States of America? And why does it always have to have that weird burnt sienna sheen on the over the lens every time they're shooting in Latin America, right? Like there is this sort of strange reluctance to acknowledge the sort of like depth and breadth of other people's lives in this industry. And so it was important to me to just, and it's important to me in everything that I do, to just sort of acknowledge, like, we're not a monolith, we're very different people, and I'm going to sort of, despite the fact that people keep trying to put us in this box, I just feel like we just have to keep letting them know that we're trying to break out of it as much as possible.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm just realizing how much I've turned into Jeffrey Wright. This is actually, I haven't worn this suit since since we made this poster, and I'm just realizing that I'm doing Jeffrey Wright. I'm doing monk cosplay, and it's really, I feel deeply embarrassed. Down to the glasses, man. Wow.
I guess the cosplay is kind of unconscious at this point.
Truly.
But that's part of the art of the movie, I think.
Thanks.
I was also thinking for myself as a filmmaker how frequently we as artists and people who work in film are sort of asked to do our important work and then our genre slumming it. Mm-hmm. Right? And that for me, I'm increasingly sort of wanting to just embrace the idea that there's value to all kinds of work, all kinds of genre, and I want to say sort of archetypal expressions.
Yeah.
And so I was also really heartened to see that there was a lack of judgment. You saw that Monk judged himself, mm-hmm. but that in fact the world around him didn't judge him nearly as intensely as he judged himself, which I think is such an interesting character to give an audience.
Yeah, So that scene with Monk and Centaura toward the end of the film,
so complex and interesting.
Thanks. Yeah. So that when I was reading the novel, I was very excited for the moment when Monk and Centaura were going to come face to face, and we would get to read their ideological differences. And it never came. That scene's not in the book. And so when I sat down to write the script, I knew that I wanted to include that because I didn't want to make a movie in which Centaura was the villain. Something that I sort of sat down to say was when Jeffrey and I first started talking about the script, the thing that we both agreed on was we didn't want to police blackness, mm-hmm. and we didn't want to police art, and we especially didn't want to police black art. And so, to me, it's sort of in keeping with the novel, the epilogue of Erasure is this Latin phrase that I was unfamiliar with, and apparently it's used in relationship with complex mathematics, and the rough translation is I offer no hypothesis. And so it's sort of like, to me, what that suggested was if I was trying to keep the spirit of the book alive, I couldn't make something didactic. I couldn't make something that was like, here's the moral lesson that you should learn on your way out the door. I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to put forward a series of characters and scenarios and situations, and then let people decide for themselves what they thought of it. And so that scene to me was a linchpin of the film. To do that was to never make Centaura a villain, and sort of to kind of surprise the audience the way that Monk himself is surprised when he's like, oh, you're formidable and thoughtful and you've considered these things. And I just thought that you were kind of a dilettante who just wanted to sort of like come in and make a bunch of money real quick and didn't actually care. And to me, the thing that I had a real growth moment in my life as an artist because I used to be very much like Monk in that way that I was like, well, why are you making this kind of work? And this kind of work is bad, and you should feel bad for making this, and aren't you embarrassed? And sort of it was a real growth moment for me when I realized one day that that question, like why are you making the art that you make? I think the art is bad. Is the wrong question. Sort of like the more interesting and valid and important question is, because the reality is that Sintara is making her work within a system and within an institution that has sort of like existed long before she was ever around, right? And so she is making work within a set of parameters that people have built and constructed around artists, right? And so she's just making her work the way that she wants to make her work, the same way that Monk is making the work that he wants to make. And so I think that the question is less about like why is Sintara making that art? The more important question is, why are the people 15 levels above Sintara and Monk who hold the purse strings, who greenlight movies and TV shows and novels, why are they so interested in telling the same few stories over and over and over about these groups of people? Why is there such a poverty of imagination when it comes to what our lives look like, right? That to me is a far more important question than why is this person making the art that they make. Far be it from me to sort of, art is hard. It's a difficult path to sort of make a life as a creative. And so if you got to make what you got to make to put food on your table and keep a roof over your head and sort of stay an artist, then far be it from me to criticize that. I'm more interested now in like why the people up here are so limited in their perspective of what our lives look like. That to me is more important.
This is your debut film.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to hear from you about the process of making the film and conceiving it and prepping it. What, if anything, were the things that surprised you the most about that process and getting a film from start to finish?
I think I was surprised by how much I really, really enjoyed it. That was the thing. I'd been a TV writer for about 7 or 8 years before we started shooting this, and I really love my TV work, and I really am proud of it, and learned a lot there. But TV writing, at the end of the day, for me, a lot of the time was, you drive to the lot and you get your salad from Jones on 3rd, and you write a little bit, and then you go home at 6 p.m. And it's like it was great, but I felt really. I don't think that I realized how much I felt removed from the final product and felt removed from sort of like what was going on outside of that, our sort of like fiefdom there. And so just from the moment we were sort of like in the production offices for pre-production and then sort of like being on set every day, like just being in the thick of it, the thing that I realized was that I just missed this. It's not as if you don't do this in writer's room, but it's just creative problem solving with sort of like people that you like around you, and that's all it was. And it was like, and I realized like, oh, being like with 80 people at 1 a.m. in the rain on a Tuesday, and sort of like you're all hungry and tired, and you want to go home, but you're there building this thing together, like the camaraderie of that, and sort of like just the way that you sort of like make fast friends with people. Like I worked with some of those people on, we had 26-day shoot. I worked with some of those people for like around a month, and I am like they're going to be friends of mine forever. And I've worked on TV shows for years, and it's like, yeah, I like those people, I love them, they're going to be my friends. But just the sort of the relationships that I built with those people over that short amount of time, it was wonderful. Just because what you're doing is just you're there to achieve the same thing every day, and you're in the same struggle, and I loved that. And so I think that I didn't realize like how I loved my TV jobs, but I don't think that I sort of realized how much I just really wanted to be in the thick of it and getting my hands dirty like that.
Well, and the pleasure of being the final decision.
Yeah.
It must have felt just wonderful.
Yeah, but also the pleasure of like surrounding myself. The thing that I told everybody who, from Jeffrey Wright on down, the thing that I told everybody was, listen, I've never done this before. I've never directed traffic. It doesn't like this is all brand new to me. I'd never written a movie before this, and so the thing that I said was like, I understand it's hard to be a cinematographer. That's a hard job. Particularly, it's especially a hard job on a independent movie with limited resources and limited money. So if you don't want to do your job and teach me sometimes, I totally understand that. I don't begrudge you that. Like, it's hard to be a cinematographer, and if you don't want to be a cinematographer and a substitute teacher sometimes, that's okay. That's reasonable. It's a reasonable thing to say no and walk away from that. Because I'm not going to understand everything at the outset. I'm smart and I'm a quick learner, but there's going to be things that you need to help me understand. And I told everybody that. So everybody who signed on to the movie, I just felt incredibly, I hope that they felt protected with me and sort of like protected with the movie that I made, and I hope they feel proud of it. But even more so, I felt protected by all of them. So that's sort of what allowed me the courage to go to work every day and sort of like and wake up and get out of bed, and so that I wasn't sort of trembling in fear every day, was that I had these people around me who not just sort of so I could make the final decision, but I'd hired people who I really trusted to help me make the final decision, if that makes sense. Like that sort of meant the world to me. When I hired my editor, Hilda, I told her, I was like, just don't ever lie to me. That's all that I care about. Is if you think something's bad, tell me you think it's bad. And she did. And sometimes it pissed me off, but it was great, because after a few minutes, I was like, oh no, this is why I hired you. Is I hired you to be honest with me and to help me make this thing better. And so I just felt, I don't believe in the auteur thing. I wrote it and directed it, of course, but there was hundreds of people who helped me achieve this vision, and I just felt so supported by all of them, which made my job much easier.
Well, the collaboration you're talking about, I think, only enhances the complexity of the film, the complexity that you're encouraging and interrogating in the film, and it really shows. And I've just been told we're out of time.
Oh no!
And there's so much more to talk about.
Dang,
but I just want to say thank you so much for making this.
Thank
movie.
you. Thank you all so much.